I'm going to have to come up with a new title for this series, aren't I? Is it worth it, though? For one, maybe 2 instalments? I don't know, but I guess you guys will by the time you see this. Last year, I started a series looking back at some of my personal highlights from my favourite TV show of all time, the British science fiction sitcom Red Dwarf, initially intended on being a 2-parter. One part looking at the series' original run between 1988 and 1999 on BBC Two, and then concluding with its soft reboot on UK free-to-air channel Dave a decade later. Part 1 of which was recorded when I was just starting out on YouTube and didn't have the editing knowledge and equipment that I do now. It was also slightly marred by a post-editing process software designed to shrink the eventual file size for upload, something suggested to me by a good friend and fellow YouTuber Irate Alex. This had the effect of messing up the final aspect ratio of the video and causing any on-screen text to be cut off at the edges. So cheers for that, dude. In total honesty, I miscalibrated the program, so it's my fault. But, blame deflected is blame shared, right? Following this, part 2 eventually turned into a bit of a video essay on the first attempt to bring Red Dwarf back in 2009, with some of my personal gripes with that special, and not wanting to unbalance the video by having a 10-minute rant about that and then getting back to format, I decided to give it its own video, and then address the full Dave series, being, at the time, series 10, 11 and 12 separately. Somewhat ironically, this series, like the series it discusses, ended up being left adrift for a while, though thankfully not for a decade. But with a recent upswell in dwarf-related news and content and activity, the first being the recent TV movie The Promised Land back in April, and currently the very popular quarantine commentaries taking place as Zoom meetings on Sunday afternoons, something which I'm very honoured to take part in myself. The Promised Land will be getting its own video very soon, and I do have plans for more Red Dwarf related content, maybe possibly looking at the novels, including a more in-style for this channel readings of extracts from said novels, and maybe even a history of the failed Red Dwarf movie. But for now, I felt the urge to cap this particular strand of video off and take a look at Red Dwarf's gradual return to glory. As usual, while this shouldn't need to be stated, but, YouTube and that, what follows is solely my personal opinion, and not to be taken as the letter of the law regarding this. I also have recently rewatched the 3 series in question, including hosting a watch party over on my Discord of series 11 and 12, which gave me the opportunity to further share my love for this show with some of my community. There is one slight change in the format with this instalment, as it only covers 3 series. I'm picking my favourite 2 episodes per series, else this video would end up being pointlessly short by comparison. I will also pick out 1 or 2 highlights from episodes that maybe I don't go into so much detail on. So at the risk of making this intro longer than the rest of the video, I'll move swiftly on and start looking at Series X, 10. Okay, Back to Earth is generally considered Series 9, hence why this is Series 10. Just leave it, okay? Produced in 2011 and broadcast in 2012, Series 10 was the first step towards Red Dwarf re-achieving the quality and magic that made the show so popular and loved in the mid-90s. While sticking with the partial bigger budget afforded to them by new paymasters UK TV, they opted for a more classic, grungy or smeggy look, as opposed to the bright, clean one as seen in Back to Earth. Mercifully, returning to the production was also the studio audience, restoring the warmth and elevation of performance I bemoaned was lacking in the 2009 specials. While the production of the series was a little trickier than usual, with cast illnesses and a post-production glitch which almost rendered the entire series unbroadcastable, Red Dwarf 10 was a triumphant success, and proved what all us fans had thought for years, that there was still a lot of life left in Red Dwarf yet. Of particular note are the series' opening 2 episodes, Trojan and Fathers and Sons. In Trojan, the crew discover a derelict ship powered by an experimental, but super powerful, quantum rod, a ship that traverses the galaxy in a similar fashion to Douglas Adams' infinite improbability drive. After boarding the ship, Crichton and Rimmer receive a distress call from Rimmer's long-lost brother, Howard, captain of a newly Nearby, thanks to the quantum rod, crashing ship, Rimmer decides to rescue his sibling while posing as Trojan's commanding officer in an effort to impress Howard and lead him to believe he isn't just a dead chicken soup machine repairman. Meanwhile, Lister undergoes a horrendous, torturous experience with one of the universe's most feared of entities, an automated telephone system.
Mister, will you turn that damn thing off? I'm trying to revise.
I'm getting that stare, Master Rimmer. I'm not hanging up this phone. It goes everywhere with me. The loo, the bath, you name it. If Kachansky walks through that door now and wants sex, I'll wedge it in me bum crack and get to work.
Trojan was a fantastic start to this new-look Red Dwarf. Gag-heavy with tightly scripted, and in spite of the mild implausibility of Lister's side story in the episode, 3 million years into deep space, I doubt even Amazon would be able to promise one-day delivery, no matter how many of their employees injure themselves, die, or piss and shit into bottles to maintain it. Perfect example of Doug Naylor's ability to write wild, slightly speculative fiction, but still keep a very relatable human heart to the show, tackling sibling rivalry, self-worth, and of course being left on Smeg in hold ad infinitum. It also contains the best delivery of the word twat in any medium ever.
But you were an utter twat!
Change my mind on that. This episode was followed by the equally hilarious, but a little more sci-fi light, Fathers and Sons, revisiting the plot point that Lister is, by quirk of weird space-time smegatry, his own father. The episode reveals that Lister sends himself a Father's Day card every year, then drinks himself into such a state as to forget that he did, and then, when he receives the card, he can't remember it was him who sent it in the first place, and thereby has a nice surprise. However, this particular year, Lister decides to send himself a rather unusual gift, a video message berating him for not having made much of himself, and attempts to force Dave onto a path of self-improvement, starting with getting his tooth fixed. Whilst all this soul-searching is going on, Crichton and Rimmer install Pre, a new computer to help run the ship, Holly apparently still either being lost, broken, or simply too senile now to run things. It transpires that Pre is based on predictive technology and proceeds to perform actions based on past behaviours and extrapolating what will be asked of her. This proves to be a little too dangerously efficient, especially with a crew of essentially idiots on board.
There is now a 98% probability you will discuss my potential for changing your lives and reach the conclusion that you're looking forward to seeing me in action. You now no longer need to have this conversation and can do something else.
Fathers and Sons is one of the more cleverly plotted episodes of this new batch, and both plot strands and even a running side joke about Chinese whispers all wrap themselves up together to form a great climax to the episode. I rather enjoy the more personal episodes of Red Dwarf, and thrown into this is the kind of logical twisting that always makes for a roller coaster of a plot.
Breast size. I can't honestly believe they actually still ask that question these days. It's absolutely ludicrous, it really is.
No, I totally agree with you, sir. I'll choose the first one, 30A.
Hang on.
Honourable mentions for this series go to its finale, The Beginning, which sees the crew in a life-or-death battle against a simulant death ship, armed with 2 forks and a pencil sharpener. Oh, and a gun, which makes things go all wibbly. In this episode, Rimmer discovers a rather shocking fact about his lineage, which I won't spoil here, and Doug Naylor very gently prods us, the fans, with another answer to an over a decade-old question. How did they get themselves out of Series 8?
Like the time that highly corrosive microorganism almost destroyed Red Dwarf.
The highly corrosive microorganism, exactly. We got out of that one.
Yeah, thanks to me.
Oh, sir, you cannot claim the credit for that.
It was a total fluke.
Fluke? You think that was an accident, the way I...
Shh. What's that?
Only to then snatch it away from us again.
Just like we got out of that thing with a highly corrosive microorganism. Once again, Big Arm saves the day.
Oh, please, sir, can we sort this out once and for all? Just because you happen
You killed my brother.
Twice. The bastard. Following the smash success of Series 10, it was pretty inevitable there would be more, and this was confirmed at 2015's Dimension Jump convention. That Series 11 and 12 would be produced back-to-back, starting later that year, ready for broadcast at the end of 2016 and 2017. Series 11 and 12 was an almost perfect fusion of, once again, newly expanded budget and Naylor's continuing efforts to keep what makes Red Dwarf. While 12 episodes written in one go may be a large task for most solo writers, Naylor managed it with aplomb, and the episodes were just as funny, interesting and exciting as ever before. That said, a small handful of episodes do seem to prematurely end at a point, leaving little room for the usual denouement that an episodic series might require. Series 11's Samsara and Officer Rimmer being the key examples of this. However, that doesn't prevent Officer Rimmer being one of my choices for this series. When an adrift ship gets caught in the orbit of a sun and begins to crash towards it, a botched act of cowardice, or arguably pragmatism, from Rimmer ultimately saves the life of the ship's newly bioprinted captain, Herring, leading him to promote Rimmer to navigation officer, and this quite obviously goes straight to Rimmer's head, and he starts to improve life on board, for himself. Deciding to repopulate the crew with bioprinted copies of himself, Rimmer discovers once again the limits of his command capabilities.
Pull, Bright! Pull me! Pull!
While some may argue this is a slightly well-worn choice of plot for Red Dwarf, Officer Rimmer is a hilarious new take on the more than one Rimmer as a disaster idea, with Arnold's smugness dialed up to 11 being quickly tempered by his sheer panic when he inevitably starts screwing it up, with disastrous consequences. Add to that the nightmarish image of the Rimmer barbershop quartet, which, let's face it, is far more scarier than the bio-ink Rimmer monster created at the end of the episode.
You should always make a to-do list.
You got a pen?
We always have a pen.
Next up, Crisis. Approaching the middle of his expected runtime, at the tender age of roughly 3 million years or so, Crichton begins acting out of sorts and questioning his own self-worth. Concluding he's going through a midlife crisis, Lister and the rest of the crew endeavour to find one of the ships from Crichton's original Nova fleet, and meet Butler, a technically inferior model, and one that's been left alone with no crew to serve. Butler, however, has dealt with his predicament in a wholly different way to Crichton.
This floor, am I right in thinking you've used our old friend Piney Shine with its flame protective coating and anti-slip finish?
I must confess I don't recall. I've been rather distracted lately finishing my latest novel.
Reading?
Writing.
Splendid.
Crisis is a brilliant look at something not many fans would have considered about Crichton. While he's shown signs of emotions after having broken his programming in prior series, this episode really examines the scope to which Crichton has become more than the sum of his literal parts. His barely contained envy of Butler's achievements is hilarious, as well as harkening back to his envy of Kochanski way back in Series 7. And the very Douglas Adams-esque climax, featuring a phone call from the universe itself, adds a beautiful, partially thoughtful too, come to think of it, twist in what is almost a very perfect Red Dwarf episode, although the scene with the Guelph pronunciations does very slightly overstay its welcome.
Actually, Crichton, it's akaka akakmagaha. Here, say it with me. Ma. No, it's in the throat. Ma. No, ma.
Series 11 was a tough one to pick from. Very strong writing and performances from all involved, and some brilliant ideas throughout the run. From Kat's science history lesson in Samsara to Twentica's science speakeasy. Some brilliant guest performances. I now fully believe Kevin Eldon has officially been in every single British-produced comedy series of the last 25 years or so. And of course, who can forget the return of the polymorph in Can of Worms?
I love Dalmatian puppies, look at them. I like a hedgehog in a top hat, sitting inside a mini shopping trolley.
Having been recorded and made back-to-back with the previous series, you'd think Series 12 would feel like more of the same. However, probably by design, Red Dwarf's 12th outing has an almost intangibly different feel to it. Not by any measure worse different, just different. And I do struggle to put my finger on why. It has the same mix of action-heavy and entirely dwarf-bound episodes. It has a few surprise guest stars, most notably comedy legend Johnny Vegas and actor-turned-Twitch streamer Jay Out of Off of the In-Betweeners. Of course, the difference may stem from myself. When initially broadcast at the end of 2017, I was going through a cavalcade of personal issues and possibly I appreciated this series a little more, as it felt like a comfortable reprieve from the hardships I was facing at that time in my life. But I've discussed my own life trials and tribulations elsewhere. On with my personal highlights. Series 12's opener, Cured, sees the dwarfs finally trying to fix the ever-crashing starbug and chanting across a scientific research base where they apparently have cured evil. Upon arrival, they awaken a few of their test subjects, being genetic clones of Messalina, Vlad the Impaler, Joseph Stalin, and Adolf Hitler, as well as the lead scientist on the project. However, not is all as it seems when someone in the base appears to have registered as a psychopath.
A Hitler. And you think that's mine? It did cross my mind.
Cured is as dark as Red Dwarf gets, and even though it was broadcast little under 3 years ago, probably in this current climate would lead to cancellations and removals from streaming platforms abound. I mean, I kind of get the removal of Little Britain, but the League of Gentlemen? The mighty cocking boosh? Faulty cunting towers? This is out of control and needs to stop. Actually, fun fact, they'd secured the rights to use Africa by Toto as the song that Lister and Hitler jammed to in this episode. But when someone at either Grant Naylor Productions or their partner company now, Steve Coogan's Baby Cow Productions, told the rights holder what the song would be used for, they rescinded the right to use the track. But I'm not getting into all that. This channel is remaining apolitical.
It's because I'm Hitler, isn't it?
So I'll move swiftly on to Skipper. In Skipper, Crichton reveals he's developed a dimensional skipping device which allows the user to jump between possible dimensions. So, Rimmer, seeking the opportunity to find a dimension where he isn't saddled with the last slob in human existence, a self-absorbed human-cat hybrid, and an android whose main function is to clean U-bends, volunteers to test it, leading to a very eye-opening interdimensional adventure, eventually finding an existence where he is the officer he always wanted to be. There's just one slight caveat.
I run a fairly tight ship here, Rimmer. It's one of the reasons I'm so universally respected. Fancy a cold one? No.
It might be easy to dismiss Skipper as just a chance to get a load of quick-fire gags and scenarios out of the way. What if the cat wasn't a cat? Etc. But Skipper is actually a journey of acceptance for Arnold Rimmer. And boy, once again, do we benefit from his gradual misery. There does seem to be a theme with this episode, and the closing of the previous episode from this series, M-Core, in referencing the very early days of Red Dwarf. M-Core ended with a remake of the opening scene from the very first episode, and Skipper delivers an, albeit flipped, remake of another classic scene from the same episode, with the always welcome return of Norman Lovett as Holly, something which I'll expand on in the upcoming The Promised Land review, and a cameo from Mac MacDonald as Captain Hollister, Red Dwarf's rotund senior officer. And, well, it's always nice to see the return of the Mac, isn't it? In short, Skipper may feel a little fan-servicey, but trust me, it's entirely justified.
Nobody's dead, Arnold.
Todd Hunter? Nobody's dead, not even Lister.
Gordon Bennett. Lister, Peterson, nobody. Nobody's dead. Nobody is dead, Arnold.
Series 12 felt like a more socially aware series of Dwarf than ever before, with jokes and scenarios about otherwise modern-day living, such as persistent upgrades to technology, both with the droid in Siliconia and the complete and devastating overhaul of the ship in M-Core, to more social political concerns with the idea of a everyone's a winner attitude, as displayed in Time Wave, and the outright parody of political process in Mechocracy. I'd be remiss too not to mention the return of David Ross, the original Crichton.
Would you like some toast? 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 Would you like some toast?
No!
Would you like some toast? Would you like some toast?
As alluded to, Red Dwarf means a lot to me. And despite my usual reservations about identifying as a sci-fi fan in general, I've always considered myself a comedy geek, nerd, enthusiast, and wear such a moniker on my sleeve. Red Dwarf to me isn't a sci-fi show. It's a comedy that happens to be set in space. The writing, the stories, the characters have always felt more real to me than any sitcom set in what we'd identify as a realistic setting. And since I was very, very young, the boys from the Dwarf have always been a part of my life. And with this year's TV movie, I hope to see many more new adventures from them in the coming years. Time doesn't age this series. Just as Blackadder won't age due to it being set in the far past, Red Dwarf probably won't, despite its parochial and cheap beginnings. This is truly a timeless sitcom, and one more people should be aware of.
Crichton, set a course for Red Dwarf. The slime's coming home.
Thank you for allowing me to indulge myself with this video and, in fact, this video series. There is at least one more part to come, covering the recent TV movie The Promised Land, and I hope to get that out much sooner after this one than this did following the previous. As usual, a smegging massive thank you to my patrons: Blind Girl, Inked and Pricked, Crunchy Karma, Leona Lee, Lord Crispo, M, Martin H, Mess the Moose, Michaela E, Trucker Matt, and Urbana Fox. If you wish to support me on Patreon for exclusive content, previews, and other patron-only bonuses, I'll leave a link in the description. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more content, and ring the bell to ensure YouTube bothers to let you know when I release videos or go live. My social media stuff will be in the description too, if you want to follow me on Twitter or Instagram for whatever reason. But ultimately, once again, thank you for watching. Apologies for the lack of content last month. I've got stuff in the works. It's just been a weird time for everyone lately, and I've got my mojo back for this. I love you all. Peace out. Peace off. And I'll see you all soon. You can't see this, but I am doing the double rimmer salute. Bye-bye, everyone.
Rim, 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 Mr. Rimmer. We are what we seem. Rim, 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 the cutest quartet that you've ever seen. Rim, 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 rim. We perform mouths and duets times two. Rim, 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 rim. This barbershop quartet is singing for you.